Gorilla raises abandoned lion cub. The ending will leave you speechless. A gorilla holding a lion cub? Impossible! Aisha, a 30-year-old ranger, exclaimed into her radio. Her patrol vehicle stopped dead in its tracks. Station, Boma is raising a lion cub. Need backup. Her colleague Omar's skeptical voice crackled back. Aisha, are you kidding me? But she knew it was real, and the beginning of an unbelievable story. Want to hear how this incredible bond unfolds and what shocking events follow? Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the full story of Boma and Keto, the Ngorongoro brothers. The snarls ripped through the pre-dawn gloom, a chorus of greedy hunger that vibrated in Aisha's chest. Moonlight, fractured by the thorny acacia canopy, cast a macabre, shifting pattern on the scene below. Hyenas, at least a dozen, their powerful shoulders hunched, eyes glowing with malevolent green fire. They were circling the base of the kopje, a familiar outcrop of weathered granite that served as Boma's sleeping ledge. Aisha's knuckles were white on the steering wheel of her Land Rover, the engine off. The vehicle parked precariously on a game trail half a kilometer away. Through her binoculars, the scene was terrifyingly intimate. Boma, the massive silverback gorilla, was a silhouette of primal fury perched on the edge of the highest boulder. He wasn't roaring, not yet. His presence alone, a 450-pound mountain of muscle and resolve, was usually enough to deter lesser threats. But these hyenas were desperate, emboldened by numbers and the scent that had been driving them mad for weeks. The scent of the unnatural, the impossible, the scent of Keto, the small, tawny shape huddled behind Boma, pressing into the silverback's immense thigh. Even from this distance, Aisha could imagine the cub's fear, the tremors running through his rapidly growing body. He was a paradox, a creature of fangs and claws nurtured by a gentle giant. A secret they had all. Boma, Keto, and Aisha herself conspired to keep. One hyena, larger and bolder than the rest, darted forward, snapping its jaws with an audible crack. Boma moved then, a blur of speed that defied his bulk. He lunged to the edge of the rock, letting out a short, explosive bark that echoed across the plains. The hyena recoiled, but the pack surged, a tide of spotted death. Aisha fumbled for the spotlight switch, her breath catching in her throat. Protocol dictated non-intervention in predator-prey dynamics. But this was different. This was Boma, the solitary, grieving silverback who had defied every expectation. And this was Keto, the lion cub he had claimed as his own. Before she could flip the switch, a sound pierced the cacophony, thin, reedy, yet utterly defiant. It was Keto. The cub, no bigger than a jackal, had stepped out from behind Boma's leg. He faced the sea of monstrous jaws and he roared. It was a squeak, a pathetic imitation of his species' fearsome battle cry. Yet it was filled with a spirit that mirrored the giant at his back. The hyenas paused, a flicker of surprise in their hungry eyes. In that instant, Boma rose to his full height. He beat his chest, a rapid, deafening tattoo that rolled across Ngorongoro like thunder. Then he roared, a sound not of a gentle herbivore, but of a primal king, a sound that seemed to shake the very granite beneath them. The combined effect, the cub's tiny defiance and the gorilla's earth-shattering challenge, was unexpected. The hyenas, visibly startled, took a hesitant step back. Aisha stared, her hand frozen above the spotlight, What was she witnessing? It wasn't just a gorilla protecting a cub. It was something more, something that sent a shiver down her spine, a feeling that the rules of nature itself were being rewritten on that lonely, moonlit kopje. The lead hyena snarled, shaking its massive head, clearly unwilling to give up. The pack pressed forward again, the moment of hesitation lost. The story of Boma and Quito began 6 months earlier under the relentless Tanzanian sun of early June 2025. The Great Migration had passed through Ngorongoro Crater months before, leaving the resident lion prides struggling. Food was scarce, and one young lioness, emaciated and desperate, had made a heartbreaking choice. She had abandoned her single male cub, barely a few days old, near a drying waterhole on the crater's periphery. His faint, mewling cries were nearly swallowed by the vastness of the caldera. Aisha Kiprop, a senior ranger with Tanzania National Parks Authority, TANAPA, found him. At 32, with a master's degree in wildlife biology and a reputation for unwavering dedication, Aisha had seen the harsh realities of nature countless times. Her instructions were clear: observe, report, do not interfere. A lone, abandoned cub was a meal for a scavenger, a sad but natural end. She noted the location, the cub's moribund state, fur matted with mud, ribs stark beneath the thin coat, eyes barely open, and was about to drive on, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. That's when Boma appeared. Boma was a legend in Ngorongoro, but not for the usual reasons. He wasn't the dominant silverback of a thriving troop. He was a solitary giant. Years ago, his small family group had been decimated by a rare primate virus, leaving him the sole survivor. Rangers had expected him to challenge for another troop or fade into lonely obscurity. Instead, Boma had carved out a quiet existence on the crater rim, a melancholic, introspective figure, often observed sitting for hours, gazing out over the vast expanse. He was known for his immense size, but also for a perceived gentleness, a lack of the typical silverback aggression unless provoked. Aisha watched from a distance, hidden by a cluster of acacia trees, as Boma approached the distressed sounds. He moved with a ponderous grace, his massive head turning, his deep-set, intelligent eyes scanning his surroundings. He stopped at the edge of the muddy patch where the cub lay. Aisha held her breath. A gorilla, even a gentle one, was a potential threat. He might see the cub as a curiosity, or worse, a minor irritation to be swatted away. Boma grunted softly, a low rumble. He knelt, his huge leathery hand surprisingly delicate, reaching out. He prodded the tiny creature. The cub, Quito as Aisha would later name him, Jewel in Swahili, for the spark of life she prayed he still held, let out another weak cry. Boma tilted his head. He sat, his brow furrowed in what looked like contemplation. Then, with infinite care, he scooped up the mud-caked lion cub. He held it to his broad chest, cradling it almost like a gorilla mother would hold her infant. Quito, instinctively seeking warmth, nestled against the coarse black fur and, miraculously, fell silent. Aisha's jaw dropped. She fumbled for her radio. "Omar, you are not going to believe this. Boma has a lion cub." Her senior colleague, Omar Hassan, a grizzled veteran ranger with a dry wit and an encyclopedic knowledge of Ngorongoro's fauna, was predictably skeptical. "Aisha, the heat is getting to you. A lion cub. Boma. He'd be more likely to eat it for roughage, if he ate meat at all. I'm serious, Omar. He's holding it gently. Aisha's mind raced. This was unprecedented, dangerous. A lion cub needed milk, specialized care. A gorilla troop, if Boma ever joined one, would never tolerate a predator in its midst. And what would happen when the cub grew? The inciting incident wasn't a single decision, but a cascade of them, beginning with Boma's impossible act of compassion. For Aisha, it was the moment she decided not to immediately report the full extent of the situation up the chain of command, knowing it would likely result in the cub's removal and probable euthanasia, or Boma potentially being harmed if he resisted. Instead, she documented it meticulously, her scientific curiosity warring with a profound, almost spiritual sense of wonder. Her initial unspoken commitment was to observe, but observation quickly morphed into clandestine support. For the first few critical weeks, Quito's survival was a desperate gamble. Boma could provide warmth and protection, but not sustenance. Aisha, using her own limited funds and fabricating reasons for requisitions of veterinary supplies, began leaving caches of specially formulated carnivore milk replacer near Boma's resting spots, usually under the cover of darkness or pre-dawn patrols. She'd watch from afar, her heart pounding, as Boma, with an uncanny intelligence, would find the formula. He never drank it himself. Instead, he'd dip his fingers into the bowl and let Quito lick them, or patiently hold the bowl for the clumsy cub. It was a fragile secret alliance. Boma, the grieving gorilla, found a new purpose. Quito, the abandoned jewel, found an unlikely savior. And Aisha, the dedicated ranger, found herself treading a perilous line between her professional obligations and a deeply personal, ethically complex mission to protect this extraordinary, impossible bond. She knew the risks. If discovered, her career would be over. But every time she saw Boma gently grooming the tiny cub, or Quito playfully batting at the silverback's enormous, patient hand, she knew she couldn't turn away. The Ngorongoro anomaly, as she began to call it in her private journals, had taken root. The weeks turned into months. Under Boma's unorthodox but devoted care and Aisha's surreptitious nutritional support, Quito thrived. His fuzzy neonatal coat gave way to the smoother, spotted fur of a growing cub. His eyes, once milky blue, sharpened into the keen amber of his kind. He was a whirlwind of kittenish energy, stalking Boma's feet, pouncing on swaying blades of grass, and tumbling in mock battles with the silverback's massive, patient hands. Boma, for his part, seemed rejuvenated. The profound melancholy that had clung to him for years began to lift. He was more active, more engaged with his surroundings, his focus always returning to the small, tawny creature in his charge. Aisha's logistical challenges grew with Quito. The milk formula gave way to small pieces of meat, which she painstakingly sourced, often bartering with local butcheries in Karatu town, miles from the crater, claiming it was for research samples. She had to be incredibly careful. Leaving meat scraps could attract scavengers and alter Boma's natural foraging patterns, drawing unwanted attention. She devised a system of leaving the food in sealed containers that Boma, with his surprising dexterity, learned to open. Omar, though initially disbelieving, wasn't blind. He noticed Aisha's extended patrols in Boma's territory, the unusual items on her supply requests. One afternoon, he confronted her directly. "Aisha, the other rangers are starting to whisper. Your special project with Boma, it involves more than just observation, doesn't it? Aisha, caught off guard, stammered a denial, but Omar's gaze was knowing. He sighed, running a hand over his weathered face. "I've seen Boma with the cub," he admitted quietly. "Saw them last week, near the Lamala Ascent Road. The little one was trying to hunt Boma's big toe." A rare smile touched his lips. "In all my years, never." He looked at Aisha, his expression serious. "This is a dangerous game you're playing, my dear, not just for your career, for them. What happens when that cub isn't so little anymore, when his instincts truly kick in?" Aisha explained her rationale, her fears, her hopes. She showed him her detailed notes, her photographic evidence of the incredible bond. Omar listened patiently. He didn't promise to help, but crucially, he didn't threaten to expose her. His tacit complicity became another layer in the fragile ecosystem supporting Boma and Quito. He became a silent guardian, occasionally diverting other patrols or covering for Aisha's unusual movements. The first real test of the bond came when Quito was about 3 months old. He was teething, his needle-sharp, deciduous teeth exploring everything. During a playful tussle, he nipped Boma's hand, harder than intended, drawing a pinprick of blood. Boma yelped, a short, surprised sound, and gently cuffed Quito, sending the cub tumbling. Quito, startled and momentarily scared, let out a tiny, affronted squeal. For a tense moment, Aisha, observing from her concealed post, feared the worst. Would this be the moment Boma realized the inherent danger? But Boma simply looked at his hand, then at the chastened cub. He grunted softly, a sound Aisha had come to recognize as a form of reassurance, and then, remarkably, he extended his hand again. Quito, after a moment's hesitation, crept forward and licked the spot, his small, rough tongue surprisingly gentle. The incident, though minor, highlighted the growing complexity. Quito was a predator, and Boma, despite his size, was vulnerable in ways he didn't comprehend. Other gorillas in the Ngorongoro highlands, mostly small, transient bachelor groups or solitary individuals, occasionally crossed paths with Boma. Their reactions to Quito were varied. Some, perplexed by the sight of the silverback with a small, tawny creature, kept their distance, emitting low rumbles of confusion. Others, bolder juvenile males, showed curiosity that quickly turned to nervous alarm when Boma issued a possessive, warning cough if they ventured too close to the cub. Quito, in these encounters, would instinctively press himself against Boma's leg, a silent plea for protection that the silverback always granted. As Quito grew, so did his need for space and his instinct to explore. He started making clumsy attempts to stalk insects and small lizards, his movements a comical imitation of adult lion hunting techniques. Boma would watch these expeditions with an air of paternal indulgence, occasionally nudging Quito back if he strayed too far. The sight of a 450-pound gorilla patiently waiting while a lion cub attempted to catch a butterfly was a scene of such profound incongruity that it bordered on the surreal. The whispers among the other rangers, however, were growing louder. A tourist, on a distant telephoto shot, had captured a blurry image of Boma with an unidentified small animal. The park warden, a stern by-the-book administrator named Mr. Mwangi, had started asking pointed questions about unusual animal behaviors in Boma's territory. Aisha knew her time was running out. The secret of the Ngorongoro anomaly was too extraordinary, to remain hidden forever. The complications were no longer just about logistics and secrecy. They were about the fundamental, unalterable natures of the two beings at the heart of this impossible family. Keto was becoming a lion, and the world, both natural and human, would soon demand that he act like one. Keto was nearly 8 months old, the size of a small Alsatian, his spotted coat beginning to fade into the more uniform tawny gold of adolescence. His playful nips were now backed by developing jaw strength, and his once clumsy pounces carried surprising weight. Boma, while still patient, was beginning to show subtle signs of weariness from the cub's relentless energy. The delicate balance they had maintained was becoming increasingly precarious. The turning point arrived not with a bang, but with a calculated, unwelcome intrusion. Dr. Lena Hansen, a renowned primatologist from a European university, arrived at Ngorongoro. She wasn't there for lions. Her specialty was aberrant behavior in great apes, and whispers of a solitary silverback with an unusual attachment had reached her academic circles. Unlike the local rangers, who were either protective of the anomaly or simply bewildered by it, Dr. Hansen came armed with research grants, an entourage of assistants, and an unshakable conviction in her right to study, and, if necessary, to intervene. Mr. Mwangi, the park warden, saw Dr. Hansen's arrival as an opportunity. He was under pressure to manage the Boma situation, and the primatologist offered a veneer of scientific legitimacy to whatever actions might be taken. He granted her extensive access, much to Aisha's and Omar's dismay. Dr. Hansen was efficient and clinical. She set up observation posts far more sophisticated than Aisha's, complete with high-powered cameras and sound recording equipment. Her initial reports, circulated internally, were stark. She described Boma's behavior as a severe form of displacement activity, likely stemming from past trauma, and Keto as a potentially dangerous foreign element. She recommended immediate separation for the safety of both animals and the integrity of the ecosystem. Keto, she argued, needed to be integrated with his own kind, or, failing that, moved to a sanctuary. Boma, she suggested, might benefit from behavioral readjustment therapy, a term that made Aisha shudder. Aisha tried to reason with her, sharing her own months of observations, emphasizing the depth of the bond. Dr. Hansen, this isn't just a displacement activity. There's affection. There's communication. Boma isn't just tolerating Keto. He's nurturing him. Dr. Hansen was unmoved. Ranger Kiprop, your observations are, shall we say, colored by sentiment. Affection is an anthropomorphism. What I see is a silverback exhibiting stress behaviors and a young predator whose natural instincts will inevitably lead to conflict. It's a ticking time bomb. The warden, swayed by Hansen's confident pronouncements, authorized a plan for Keto's capture and relocation to a lion sanctuary several hundred miles away. The operation was scheduled for the following week. Aisha was devastated. She felt as though she were betraying Boma and Keto. Omar, equally grim, advised caution. Mwangi has made his decision. If you interfere directly, you'll lose your job, and it won't change anything for them. But Aisha couldn't stand by. She knew Boma. The sudden removal of Keto would be devastating for the silverback, potentially sending him into a spiral of grief and aggression. And Keto, separated from the only parent he had ever known, would be terrified and traumatized. The night before the planned capture, Aisha made a desperate choice. It was a move from reactive observation and clandestine support to proactive, risky intervention. She decided she had to try and move Boma and Quito, to lead them away from Boma's usual territory, deeper into a more remote, less accessible part of the crater highlands, where the capture team might have more difficulty. It was a long shot, a foolish hope, but she had to try. Using a series of low, familiar whistles that Boma had, over months, come to associate with the appearance of food, she tried to lure him away from his kopje. It was a slow, painstaking process. Boma was wary, confused by the nocturnal summons. Quito, more curious, often bounded ahead, then ran back to nuzzle Boma's leg as if encouraging him. Hours into her desperate gamble, as dawn was breaking, disaster struck. Not from the capture team, but from within. Quito, playful and perhaps agitated by the unusual nighttime activity, engaged Boma in a rougher-than-usual play session. He lunged, and Boma, attempting to sidestep, slipped on a loose patch of scree. The silverback went down, his massive weight landing awkwardly on his left arm. A sharp crack echoed in the still morning air. Boma roared, a sound of pure agony and surprise that ripped through Aisha's heart. Quito, shocked and frightened by the sound and the sudden fall, backed away, whimpering. Aisha rushed forward, abandoning all pretense of concealment. Boma lay on the ground, his left arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his face contorted in pain. He looked at Aisha, his deep brown eyes filled with confusion and hurt. This was the true turning point. It wasn't just about external threats anymore, the inherent danger of their bond. The risk Quito posed simply by being himself had manifested in a terrible accident. Dr. Hansen's words about a ticking time bomb echoed in Aisha's mind with horrifying clarity. Boma was injured, vulnerable. Quito was scared, and the capture team would be arriving in hours. Aisha's desperate attempt to save them had, it seemed, only made things catastrophically worse. She was no longer just an observer or a secret helper. She was now at the center of a crisis, with no clear way out. The point of no return well and truly passed. The arrival of Mr. Mwangi, Dr. Hansen, and the capture team later that morning was grim. Boma was still lying where he had fallen, his breathing shallow, the injured arm clearly causing him immense pain. Quito huddled miserably beside him, occasionally licking the silverback's face, his youthful exuberance entirely extinguished. He emitted low, mournful whimpers, a stark contrast to his usual playful chirps. Dr. Hansen, upon examining Boma from a safe distance, confirmed a severe fracture of the forearm. He needs immediate veterinary attention. The cub will have to be removed now, for his safety and ours. Her tone was clinical, but Aisha detected a flicker of something else, perhaps a grudging respect for the scene before her, or the dawning realization that her academic theories were now faced with a raw, emotional reality. Mwangi, however, was all business. Ranger Kiprop, your unauthorized actions last night have complicated matters significantly. You are officially suspended, pending a full inquiry. He then turned to the vet accompanying the team. Tranquilize the gorilla. We'll airlift him to the primate center in Arusha. Secure the cub. Aisha, though officially sidelined, refused to leave. She stood her ground, her voice shaking but firm. Mr. Mwangi, tranquilizing Boma in his current state, with this level of stress and injury is incredibly risky. And taking keto now, you'll traumatize them both beyond repair." She pleaded, "There has to be another way. Let me try to calm Boma. Let Omar help. We know him." Surprisingly, it was Omar who managed to sway Mwangi, not with emotion, but with pragmatic logic. "Warden, if the silverback dies from shock or the tranquilizer, the international outcry will be severe, especially with Dr. Hansen here as a witness to this unique situation. And a panicked, separated lion cub is a danger to everyone." He proposed a compromise. They would try to splint Boma's arm in the field, a risky and difficult procedure. Keto would be allowed to remain nearby, as his presence, however unorthodox, seemed to be the only thing keeping Boma from complete agitation. The next few hours were a tense, agonizing ballet of improvisation and courage. The vet, a young, capable woman named Dr. Cheche, worked with Omar, and a reluctant Aisha, reinstated temporarily due to the emergency, to approach Boma. Keto watched, anxious, from a few feet away, occasionally letting out a soft growl if anyone moved too quickly towards the injured silverback. Boma, despite his pain, remained surprisingly passive as long as Keto was in his line of sight, and Aisha spoke to him in the low, calming tones she had used for months. They managed to administer a local anesthetic and a sedative, not enough to knock him out completely, but enough to dull the pain and allow them to roughly splint the broken arm. Throughout the procedure, Keto was a strange sentinel. He never left Boma's side. When Boma groaned in pain, Keto would press against him, a silent comfort. Dr. Hansen observed, her notepad filling with furious scribbles, her expression unreadable. With Boma's arm crudely stabilized, a new, fragile plan was hatched. They wouldn't move him immediately. Instead, they would monitor him on site. A temporary camp was established nearby. Aisha and Omar were tasked with Boma's care, which by extension meant Keto's. The threat of immediate separation had been averted, but it was a temporary reprieve. The core problem remained: Keto was a lion, and Boma was a gorilla. The following days were a strange, suspended reality. Aisha and Omar brought food and water for Boma, fruit, young shoots, and his favorite wild celery. For Keto, Aisha continued to provide meat, now under the watchful, critical eye of Dr. Hansen, who had decided to stay and document the post-trauma bonding behavior. Keto, sensing Boma's vulnerability, became fiercely protective. He would often sit positioned between Boma and any approaching human, a miniature guardian whose low growls held a surprising degree of menace. The hyena pack, however, had not forgotten the unusual scent emanating from Boma's territory. Their nocturnal visits became more frequent, their howls more audacious. They sensed weakness. Boma, one-armed and recovering, was no longer the invulnerable titan he once was. The scent of the young lion cub, usually masked by the gorilla's stronger odor, seemed more pronounced now, perhaps due to Keto's own stress. Aisha and Omar took turns on watch, building a large fire each night to keep the scavengers at bay. But the hyenas were growing bolder. They would skirt the edges of the firelight, their eyes glinting. One evening, a particularly large hyena, the same one Aisha had seen led the pack at the Kopje weeks before, darted in, attempting to snatch a piece of meat left for Keto. Keto, with a burst of unexpected ferocity, lunged at the hyena, snapping his small teeth. The hyena, surprised by the cub's audacity, recoiled, but not before delivering a glancing bite to Quito's flank. Quito yelped in pain. Boma, who had been dozing fitfully, surged to his feet with a deafening roar. His one good arm flailing, he charged a few steps, scattering the closer hyenas before his injury forced him to stop. Panting, the hyenas, momentarily intimidated, retreated, but their hunger and determination were palpable. Aisha cleaned Quito's wound, her heart heavy. The stakes were escalating. Boma was still injured. Quito was now also hurt. The hyenas were closing in, a relentless, patient siege. Dr. Hansen, watching the drama unfold, quietly told Aisha, "This cannot be sustained. Ranger, nature is forcing a resolution." Aisha knew she was right. The dark night of the soul she had been dreading was upon them. The hyenas were no longer just a background threat. They were the immediate, pressing catalyst. The final confrontation felt inevitable, and Aisha feared that this time there would be no miraculous escape, no quiet intervention that could save her impossible family. The air was thick with impending violence, and the moon, when it rose, seemed to hang like a blood orange in the inky sky. The attack came just before dawn, the hour when resolve is at its lowest ebb and predators are most desperate. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and a chill mist was creeping up from the crater floor, muffling sound and reducing visibility. Aisha, exhausted from a near-sleepless vigil, was startled awake by a low, guttural growl from Quito. The cub stood stiff-legged, ears flattened, a deep rumble vibrating in his small chest, aimed towards the shifting shadows beyond the firelight. Boma, propped against a cluster of rocks, his splinted arm resting on his lap, was instantly alert. He made a soft, questioning noise to Quito, a sound Aisha had learned meant, "What is it?" Then the hyenas came, not one or two, but the whole pack, at least 15 strong, emerging from the mist like wraiths. They were no longer cautious. The alpha, its scarred muzzle curled in a horrifying grin, led the charge. Their yips and whoops shattered the morning stillness. Omar, sleeping in the Land Rover nearby, was jolted awake by the commotion. He shouted, fumbling for his heavy-duty flashlight and the rifle he always kept loaded with non-lethal deterrent rounds. Dr. Hansen, from her small tent, yelled something incoherent, but events were moving too fast. The hyenas, driven by days of hunger and the tantalizing scent of vulnerability, were upon them. 3 lunged directly at Boma, snapping at his injured arm and his legs. Boma roared, a sound of agony and fury, swatting with his good arm, connecting with one hyena and sending it tumbling back with a yelp. But the others pressed in, their teeth seeking purchase. Quito, in that terrifying moment, did something astonishing. He didn't run. He didn't cower. The 8-month-old lion cub, fueled by a courage far exceeding his size, launched himself at the nearest hyena attacking Boma. He was a tiny, tawny missile, all teeth and claws, fastening onto the hyena's thick neck ruff. The hyena, surprised and momentarily pained by the cub's sharp teeth, shook its head violently, trying to dislodge him. Aisha screamed, adrenaline surging through her. She grabbed a burning branch from the fire, waving it wildly as she ran toward the melee. Get back! Get away from them! Omar was there an instant later, his powerful flashlight beam cutting through the mist, momentarily blinding some of the attackers. He fired a cracker shell from his rifle. The explosive bang and flash startled the hyenas, making some of them pause. Boma, seeing Quito's desperate courage, seemed to find a new reserve of strength. With a monumental effort, he pushed himself up, using the rocks for support. He stood tall, towering over his attackers, his good arm a blur as he rained blows down on them. He wasn't just defending himself. He was a father protecting his child, a king defending his tiny, improbable heir. His roars were deafening, continuous, a sound of pure, unadulterated protective rage. The alpha hyena, momentarily distracted by Quito's tenacious attack on its packmate, turned its attention to the cub. It lunged, jaws agape, aiming to crush Quito. "No!" Aisha shrieked. She threw her burning branch directly at the alpha's face. It struck the hyena on the side of its head, showering it with sparks. The beast yelped, momentarily disoriented. In that critical second, Boma lunged forward despite his injury and slammed his massive shoulder into the alpha hyena, sending it sprawling simultaneously. Omar fired another cracker shell, this one landing amidst the densest group of attackers. The combination of Boma's furious defense, Quito's distracting bravery, Aisha's desperate intervention, and Omar's deterrence finally broke the hyena's resolve. They had expected an easy meal, not this coordinated multi-species fury. The alpha, recovering quickly, let out a short, frustrated howl and turned tail, disappearing back into the mist. The rest of the pack, their confidence shattered, melted away after it. Silence descended, broken only by Boma's ragged, painful breathing, Quito's whimpering, and Aisha's own gasping sobs. Quito, released by the retreating hyena, had a fresh gash on his shoulder but was otherwise alive. Boma sank back against the rocks, exhausted, his good arm trembling. Aisha and Omar rushed to them. Dr. Hansen emerged from her tent, pale and shaken, her scientific detachment completely gone. She simply stared at the scene, the injured gorilla, the bleeding cub, and the two rangers who had risked everything. Aisha knelt by Boma, tears streaming down her face, gently examining his splint, which had held. "You did it, Boma," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved him. You both did." Quito limped over and collapsed against Boma's side, nuzzling into his fur. Boma, despite his pain, turned his head and licked the top of Quito's head. The central question, could they survive such a direct, overwhelming threat, had been answered, not by a miracle, but by an astonishing display of interspecies loyalty and raw courage. The shocking truth wasn't a mystical roar, but the undeniable, unbreakable depth of their bond, forged in crisis and defended against all odds. The aftermath of the hyena attack was a turning point for everyone. Mr. Mwangi arrived later that morning, expecting to oversee a capture, and instead found a scene of quiet, battered triumph and undeniable proof of the bond he had underestimated. Dr. Hansen, visibly moved, presented her revised assessment. "Warden," she said, her voice lacking its previous clinical certainty, "what we are witnessing here is extraordinary. While the long-term prognosis for cohabitation remains complex, the level of interreliance, the protective instincts displayed by both subjects, it's beyond any documented case I know. We cannot simply tear them apart without causing irreparable harm to both." The decision was made, reluctantly but unanimously, to give Boma and Quito more time. Boma's arm was re-splinted more professionally by Dr. Cheche, and he began a slow recovery, with Quito as his constant, vigilant companion. Aisha's suspension was lifted, her actions during the attack lauded as heroic. Though a formal warning about protocol violations remained in her file, the story of the gorilla and the lion cub, no longer a secret, began to spread. At first, it was within Tanapa, then to conservation circles, and eventually, fueled by carefully managed photographs and footage released by the park primarily from Aisha's and Omar's archives, and some from a now much more empathetic Dr. Hansen. It captured the world's imagination. They were the Ngorongoro brothers, a testament to a love that defied species, but reality, as it often does, eventually intruded. As Quito approached his first birthday, he was a robust young lion, nearly as tall as a German shepherd, his predatory instincts honing daily. Though he remained gentle with Boma, his mock stalks of other animals were becoming more serious. The risk to Boma, to other wildlife, and even to Quito himself, should he provoke a larger, less tolerant animal, was growing. The decision, when it came, was heartbreaking but necessary. A leading international wildlife foundation, working with Tanapa and Dr. Hansen, developed a unique plan. Quito would be relocated, not to a sterile sanctuary cage, but to a vast, semi-wild enclosure in a private conservancy bordering the Serengeti. There, he would have the space to mature, with the eventual hope of introduction to a new, young pride. Crucially, the enclosure was designed with a special reinforced observation area that Boma, once fully recovered, could theoretically visit under controlled conditions. If both animals showed a desire for such contact, it was an experimental, costly, and logistically challenging endeavor, but it offered a sliver of hope. The day Quito left was one of the saddest Aisha had ever experienced. Quito, sensing the unusual activity and Boma's quiet distress, was agitated. Boma sat silently, watching as the transport crate was prepared. There was no resistance, just a profound, heavy sorrow in his eyes. Before Quito was gently guided into the crate, he walked over to Boma, rubbed his head against the silverback's good arm, and licked his hand one last time. Boma reached out and touched Quito's head, a final, lingering caress. Months later, Aisha and Omar accompanied Boma, his arm now fully healed, to the perimeter of Quito's new enclosure. Quito, larger now, more confident, was at the far end, interacting with another young lioness recently introduced to his space. He looked up as Boma approached the fence. For a long moment, the young lion stared. Then he let out a low, rumbling chuff, a sound of recognition. He walked towards the fence, not with the boisterousness of a cub, but with the measured gait of a young adult. Boma stood at the fence, equally still, his eyes fixed on Quito. They didn't touch. They couldn't, but they watched each other for nearly an hour, a silent communion that transcended species, distance, and the bars between them. Aisha, watching them, felt tears well up again, but this time they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of awe. The sung-so, the stunning, shocking truth, wasn't just their unlikely bond or their dramatic survival. It was the enduring power of connection, the quiet dignity of their affection, and the profound ways in which two disparate souls, against all odds, had found a family in each other, leaving an indelible mark on the Ngorongoro wilderness and on the hearts of all who had witnessed their incredible story. Boma would continue to be monitored, and occasional visits were planned. Quito was on his path to being a lion, but their shared chapter, the tale of the gorilla who raised a lion cub, became a new Ngorongoro legend, a poignant, breathtaking reminder that love, in its purest form, knows no boundaries